Hello everyone and welcome to the show. How are you all doing? I'm Nick Hunter and this is the UFO Chronicles Podcast. This episode, our guest Len Filppu comes to us from California. His story takes us back to Brockport, New York, in the summer of 1967. 16-year-old Len watched a huge orange flame-covered craft drift low across the sky, followed by a small white orb weaving behind it. He wasn't the only witness. Police officers, university staff, and other locals said they saw the same thing that night. A newspaper report even mentioned a trailing white light, confirming what Len and his friends saw. The sighting stayed with him. Years later, after working in politics, in film and Silicon Valley, he still remembers its quiet, intentional presence. More strange events followed, a poltergeist encounter, powerful coincidences, and other moments that widened his view of reality. A vivid case from the 1960s New York flat. Len is up next. But first, if you enjoy the show and you would like to help support the podcast on Patreon, you can do this for as little as $1 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/UFO Chronicles Podcast. You can also find a link in the description of this episode. Any help is very much appreciated. Now, on with the show. Hello, Len. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
You are more than welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's early for you, Len, and you're coming to us from California.
Yes, Nick, I'm in Northern California. It's dark outside, but I have a warm cup of coffee, and I've enjoyed our chat so far, which has also been warm, and looking forward to what comes next.
Wonderful stuff. Okay, Len. Now, Len, you've got an experience to share for us. Would you like to start at the beginning, please, sir?
Yeah, sure. So I did see what is termed as a unidentified flying object, but I'd like to just to let people know a little bit of background context so that the listener might get a better idea of how it impacted me. And I do want to commend you, Nick, for your show and for your willingness to let experiencers come on and take the time to explain their story. There are a lot of researchers and podcasters and experts who say that what we really need to be doing is finding more information about this phenomenon by investigations and interviewing experiencers, and then I don't necessarily see a lot of that activity going on. I do find it at your show, so I'm very pleased to be on, and I commend you for your format. So I saw the UFO when I was 16 years old. It was 1967. It's in a small village in western New York by the name of Brockport. Brockport is between Rochester and Buffalo, and there's a small State University of New York college at Brockport. And my dad taught economics there for years, and so that's where we grew up. But before 1967, when I saw it, I had the habit of reading stories and articles in Reader's Digest. Some of your listeners are going to remember Reader's Digest. It was a compilation of magazine articles that had appeared elsewhere in different magazines. It could be Look, Life, Esquire. They would be in all kinds of different magazines, and they bought the rights to them. They condensed the articles so that they weren't overly long. There were a few pages each, and you could get the essence of what the articles were about by reading Reader's Digest. And I was probably in 7th grade, maybe 8th grade. It was before high school, I'm sure. I used to read I'd keep some of those by my bed, and as I was going to sleep, I'd read one, or I'd read four, or I'd read seven until I got sleepy, and I'd put it aside and go to sleep. This one evening, I read an article, really for the first time taking seriously UFOs, flying saucers, and there was some account of witnesses who experienced a UFO, and they spoke with such clarity, they spoke with such honesty, and the writer of this article was able to convey a credibility and a truthfulness that really hit me. It hit me not like a fact that is recognized intellectually, but more like a truth that is understood holistically. I remember the feeling. I just paused in my bed after reading this article, and I thought, yes, of course, this makes complete sense. Why is everyone telling us this can't exist when it's so obvious that it probably does? Well, that set me on a hobby of sorts. I began to research UFOs. I looked at magazines. I cut articles out of newspapers. I kept a notebook filled with books and articles and anything I could get about UFOs. Now, this is mid 1960s, so there was no internet, and there wasn't the ubiquity of UFO material around as there is now. So it was more sporadic. I was doing that in between, school and athletics and Boy Scouts and girls and all the rest, and goofing off and all the rest of the stuff. Anyway, I became known amongst my friends as kind of the UFO nut, and I proudly wore that badge because I was up to speed on what was going on. I knew what Project Blue Book was. I knew where the swamp gas quote had come from. I could tell friends about it. And remember in that era that we were really racing to battle with the Russians about Sputnik. I remember clearly my dad took us out into the backyard to view Sputnik when it went overhead. And the entire school system changed, and there was a focus on mathematics and science. And there were plenty of sci-fi movies, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and there was a zeitgeist of flying saucers in the air. So I enjoyed knowing something about what was, going on, and I became the UFO nut amongst my group. Did I know they were real? Did I think that they were real? I had no idea. I didn't claim that this was true. I just, claimed that this was an area of research that people were involved in. So this goes on for a few years, and I'm in high school, and a friend of mine, Tim Hurley, who has allowed me, I've interviewed him extensively, and he's allowed me to use his name. Tim Hurley called me one night when I was in the summer of when I was when I was 16. And he said, Len, there's strange activity in the sky up here. Do you want to come up and take a look? So I said, sure. So I went up, and we looked around the clouds in the sky. Tim said that when he was in his room, he saw flashes of green outside, and he felt like something was watching him. And he was serious. And so we went outside. We saw, billowing cumulus clouds coming in off of either Lake Erie or Lake Ontario, which are nearby Brockport, and where all the snow comes from in the wintertime. And we really didn't see anything, but I did see in one cloud, there were just faint flashes of like an orange pink kind of color that really shouldn't be there, but it was it happened so fast, and I wasn't always focused right on that cloud that couldn't tell, but it was odd. It was different. And I had spent a lot of time in Boy Scouts outside, sleeping under the stars, camping, canoeing, you name it. And so I was familiar with what is normal outside scenario is. We thought we were the Hardy Boys, right? We were detectives and we're going to get to the bottom of this. So playfully, we put together a pinhole camera. I think we took a shoebox, put a hole in it, taped a piece of film to the back, set it up on the top of his roof, the roof of his garage, and that was it. And then we went on to other things. Nothing ever became of that. I don't think we even checked the camera the next day. The next day, he called and said, "Do you want to sleep over?" I said, "Sure." And I took my dad's sleeping bag, which was a World War II beautiful warm down sleeping bag, put it over my shoulder. And as I was leaving the house, my father said, who was in the living room, he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going up to Hurley's to look for flying saucers." And I walked out the door, screen door slammed, and I got on my bike and rode off to go up to Hurley's. Now, I never had said that before. I mean, my parents probably, knew I was interested in flying saucers. I never really had talks with them about it, but I had done, from my notebook, I had done school reports and book reports and term papers and stuff like that. I utilized this background to try to do some school projects. So I'm sure they knew, but I'd never said I'm going to look for flying saucers. And it was kind of said, a little bit facetiously, tongue in cheek. It wasn't like we were going on a UFO investigation of any kind. We weren't doing a CE5 kind of a thing. Nothing like that at all. It was just playful and animated. But that's what I said. I'm going up to Hurley's to look for flying saucers. That evening, there were four of us. It was myself, Tim Hurley, his brother Joe, and a friend of the family, Whitey Meserly. And we were sleeping in the front of Hurley's house in our sleeping bags, and we were just getting in. It was just about dark. And one of the guys said, "What was that?" And then another guy said, "Look." And I caught out of the corner of my eye a beam, like a flash of light, as though there was a beam coming from higher up and hitting the ground. And everyone was getting agitated. People were moving fast. What? There it is. And I'm looking, trying to, like a dog chasing its tail or something. I'm looking around, trying. Well, finally, I caught Whitey. Whitey had a flashlight, and they were playing a joke on me. They were playing, just a playful joke on that a UFO was coming down and flashing us. For to get the goods on Len, and I laughed. It was funny. It was just a playful prank. I wasn't not offended. It was all just part of the growing up times, and it was funny. But that's exactly what happened. Those guys fell asleep. I stayed awake. I've stared at the stars in the universe. I used to just stare at the stars and contemplate and try to figure out what is eternity, how can there be an eternity, and those kinds of questions. And at about 2 a.m., from coming over the garage where we had planted the pinhole camera the evening before, came bursting into view a huge orange flaming spherical fireball, probably about the size of the full moon. Bring it down to about a height of 200 feet, maybe 35 yards from us. Very very close, and it came slow horizontally. I have seen meteorites. This had a horizontal trajectory. It was moving very, very slowly. The flames were coming from the front and going toward the back. I could see through the orange red glow that was surrounding the entire thing, that there was something solid, some kind of nose cone type solid structure underneath all the flame and the orange glow. And it could have been acorn shape. It could have been, I've looked, I've done research over the years. The Kecksburg UFO, which is relatively famous, it comes about as close, I think, to what we saw as any other sightings. Interestingly, there was a little white orb about the size of a star that was following in its trail. It was erratically moving, as though it would catch up to the larger vehicle and then slow down and move to the right and the left, and it was following in its trail. It looked to me as though, or I thought at the time, it looked like, oh my, this larger ship or craft or whatever it was in trouble. I thought it was flaming out. I thought it was burning, possibly crashing, although there was no downward trajectory, and it was just it was gliding. It was just taking its time. And that this little star was trying to get back inside. It had been left behind, or trying to help somehow. It was almost frantic in its movements. Anyway, I woke everyone up. Tim really got a good view of it. Over the years, I'm not sure how well the other guys, through sleep-dripped eyes and weary brains, how well they saw it. But Tim and I saw it. I was up and I was standing and looking at it, and I thought, oh, I have to report this. So I took a turn, and I was headed to the Hurley's front porch to try to go in and report it. And who am I reporting it to? And then this thought just came over me. No, what are you doing? You've wanted to see this. Turn around and enjoy it. Behold, here it is. And so I did that. I forgot about reporting it and just enjoyed it and watched it as it just glided away, minding its own business, not trying to hide, not trying to get away, not trying to, leave the scene, just taking its time at 2 a.m. in the morning. The feeling I got from this, and I know I was a teenager, the feeling I got for this, especially because I had said, I'm going to look for flying saucers, Dad. And the guys played the prank on me and all the other stuff over the years, where I have kind of defended the UFO potential proposition. The feeling I got was almost personal, like they were waving hello, like they took a detour in their path to show me that there we are. You're doing a great job, Len. It seemed that they were. It wasn't really a communication, but that's the feeling I got, that here we are. Take a look, dig it, And now at the time, I knew I was a teenager, and I knew that if I really thought that this was like about me, if this was some way that they were trying to communicate, that would be so egotistically adolescent that I rejected that. So I never really pursued that kind of thinking, although that is exactly what I thought. I thought they gave me a flyby hello, wave, and say, keep up the good work. That's what I thought. Although I didn't really communicate that at the time, because when we talked to our friends and other people, they didn't believe us. It was during that time of the suppression, the ridicule, the ostracization of people who reported UFO incidents. So I just kept that to myself. A denouement on this story. That summer, I was taking driver education. And one of the assignments for driver education was go through old newspapers and find clippings of accidents and come to class and say how these accidents could have been avoided. As I was going through all our stack of old newspapers, I found an article in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle that I had not yet seen that covered this UFO I saw. And in it, there were, I think, 7 people in Geneseo, which is about 40 miles away from Brockport, saw the same thing a little bit after, in the same time frame that we saw ours, and they reported the little white star following in its trail. And it was the only newspaper report that announced that. Well, I went and I showed my dad this article, and I had told my dad about, what I saw, and, he nodded his head and said, interesting and all that. And when I showed him this article, which mentioned the little white orb, he read it and he looked up at me. He says, now I believe you. And it never occurred to me that he didn't believe me. But anyway, that's kind of a interesting thing. Other people who saw this UFO were, there was a vice president at the State University of New York at Brockport. There was a whole theater group out in Thatcher, New York. They had a campus out in Thatcher, New York, about 5 miles from Brockport, where a theater group was practicing late on a theatrical production for the summer, and they saw it. There were 2 Brockport police officers who saw it and reported it, and there were 2 Monroe County sheriffs who saw it and reported it. So it was widely witnessed, it was widely reported by credible people, and it was amazing to me. What it did for me was to show me that so many things people had been telling us, the Project Blue Book, science, institutions, government, they were either misinformed or lying to us. And it really made me question what kind of a society we were living in, where they could be so wrong about something that I could see with my own 2 eyes. And that was fascinating. So we saw our Brockport UFO at 2 a.m. on August 1st, 1967. 4 hours earlier, on July 31st, at 10 p.m., there was a watch guard in Churchville, New York Park, in a park in Churchville, New York. His name was Sidney Zipkin. He reported in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle that he saw, when he was doing his rounds in the park, his headlights shined on 2 small people wearing black, shiny uniforms who were startled by the lights of his car. They got into a flying saucer and they took off right in front of him. That was his report. This was 4 hours before we saw our Brockport UFO. Now, at that time, 1967, I'm quite sure Betty and Barney Hill's Interrupted Journey had happened, but there wasn't a great deal of discussion about abductions or aliens or landings or grays, the smaller in stature beings. That just wasn't part of the conversation. It wasn't around. And when I read his report, even though I had a life-changing moment seeing this UFO, under the situation I didn't believe Zipkin. I thought, this guy's trying to get in on the act. This guy's just making a mockery of all this. He said he saw aliens in shiny black uniform. This is nutty. And of course, that's what everyone else thought too. The newspapers ridiculed him. They reported it, and then they started, to just rip him apart. He was fired from his job. He led a life of petty crime. He wound up in jail. And he, to his dying day, from the bits of information I'm able to piece together, swore that what he saw was true and what he said was the truth. And as I look back at all this from, I'm now in retirement, and I can focus on some of these events in my life more carefully. When I look back at what he said, that is just completely in line with many of the encounter reports that we get of grays and beings and UFOs, and it's almost commonplace in the literature. So it makes me think, he very well could have been telling the truth. But because it was so outlandish at the time, his story got mixed up with our story, and it turned into a big press circus, and it just all died. People just thought we were kind of nuts. Now, there was one organization, NICAP, and I think they were a UFO investigating. I think it was National Investigations Committee for Aerial Phenomena, NICAP. They investigated both Zipkin and the Brockport UFO. They said the Brockport UFO, because of the number of witnesses, the length of time, all of its characteristics, that's a credible UFO sighting. The Zipkin thing, they could not say that it was credible. In fact, they did not say it was credible, and it was a bridge too far for them, I guess. And that's kind of how the news just died away. But there is more news on this, because as I have over the last couple of years begun to tell my story, I told it to Diana Pasulka, who wrote about it in Encounters, in chapter 9 of Encounters. And I have told my story a bit more in Facebook groups about Brockport and hometown stuff. People have come forward and said, I saw it, Len, or my father's sister saw it, and they remember that time. And there are many corroborating witnesses. And then one other person, a friend of mine, Patty Goodnow, has come forward and said that she experienced a yellow or an orange sphere UFO with 3 other people. They were in a car in Holly, New York, she says school started. So it would have been probably a few weeks to maybe a month after the one we saw. Holly, New York is 5 miles away from Brockport. So it's right in the same area. It had many of their sighting contained many of the same characteristics as the one we saw. And I'm continuing to research that, and hopefully we'll share more details as I learn them. But it builds credibility to this flap that was going on. And that's basically the UFO story, Nick.
Absolutely fascinating, Len. Thank you for sharing all that.
You bet.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? The Western New York UFO flap. So many witnesses. You had so many civilians, and there was law enforcement.
Yeah, there were 4 officers who were on duty at the time. Now, 1967 there were some other things going on. I believe 1967 was the Malmstrom Air Force Base nuclear missile shutdown incident in North Dakota or South Dakota, one of the Dakotas. Robert Salas has written about it, and he was there, witnessed it, and he gives testimony to it. And That was also a large orange. The unidentified flying object that was over the base at the time of the shutdown was a large orange sphere, which is interesting. And then there was Sags Harbor in Canada, a USO incident in 1967. There was just a lot of activity. But again, it wasn't part of the. It was really difficult to get a message out. No, very few people believed you, and they were quick to hand you a tinfoil hat and say, "Move along." We're not interested in hearing this stuff. So I've really been pleased to see the change in attitudes. Now, over the years, I have not told this story. I've worked in politics and government. I worked for, I've had dinner in the White House. I've worked on Capitol Hill. I've worked making movies. I've worked advising C-suite executives on communications in Silicon Valley for a number of years. I didn't talk about any of this stuff because, there's still the skepticism that has gone along with it over the years. But once I retired and I started to look at this incident more closely and look at some other anomalous activities that have occurred in my life, I've had the time to do it, and I've had the freedom to do it. The story gets, kind of deeper and deeper. One of the things that amazed me, to highlight the difference between now and then, I went to probably 5 years ago, maybe, after I'd retired and I was home writing. I went to my first UFO conference, and I was always afraid to go to a UFO conference. Why? Because I figured they were filled with nuts, tinfoil hats, and all kinds of stuff. I just had a general dread to go see the people there. What I found instead were serious researchers, serious people trying to understand their experiences, trying to learn more in a group environment, academics and journalists and scientists, and it was really an eye-opener for me. Outside in the lobby from one of the talks, I was just taking a break from one of the talks. I was standing talking with someone, and somehow the conversation came up that I had a UFO experience, and I was just saying in hushed tones. I wasn't even speaking loudly, and I mentioned that it's funny. I said I was going to look for flying saucers that night. As soon as I said that, a camera with lights was pointed at me. I was in the middle of this camera process. People started gathering around, and I was the center of attention just for saying that. They said, "Oh, you're an experiencer. Tell us about." And I backed out of the corner. I backed out of the light. I said, "No, I really don't want to talk about it." At this point, what was amazing was, to me, I had been rejected for 40 years. From talking about this. People, I'm sure, in my own family, close friends, that just didn't want to hear it. I was rejected. And then here I was at this time in the evolution of the UFO information, and I'm being people that want to hear what I have to say. It was a tremendous kind of leap forward in understanding and appreciation and acceptance of this subject. And it was very striking for me. So now I've begun to tell more about my experience.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the way it's been for so long, Len. I remember when I was younger and I'd try to discuss UFOs or anything a bit strange, I'd always get the Twilight Zone, especially one of my brothers, my older brother, would always whistle the Twilight Zone theme.
Right.
And then years later in the 90s, then that became the X-Files. People started whistling the X-Files. But the opinion, I think, has changed a little bit today. It is getting a lot better. You still got people out there which are still think it's still the stuff of fantasy. But the important thing is, the more people do come forward, more information we got out there, and the more it becomes accepted.
I think that's right. And that is one of the reasons I want to talk about it. I think in a way I owe it to other people to lend my support and lend my information. And hopefully there'll be researchers or journalists or scientists or academics, some people, or even just other experiencers who will maybe find some common threads and some relief in all of this. I don't believe we're going to get to the bottom of the mystery. I hear a lot of talk about disclosure and whatnot, and there's a push for disclosure and whatnot. And I, having worked in the government, worked in both agencies or departments and on Capitol Hill, they're very, very well-meaning people and in government. And I think there are many reasons why this kind of information is not going to be readily distributed, because why would you there are national security reasons why it won't be. So I don't know if pushing for disclosure, while it should be done and the investigation should go on, I don't think that should necessarily be the whole focus of the UFO effort. And that's why I like your show and what you're doing, because you're actually going to experiencers and getting their stories and learning what's really going on. I also find it interesting that our experiencers are so different. It seems almost as though experiences, the sightings or whatever, are calibrated to our own personal history in some way, that they're very individualized, that there's not one rule or one theorem that's going to cover everything. I'm a great fan of the poet Alexander Pope's treatise on man, where he says, essentially, man is the sole judge of truth in endless error hurled, the glory, jest, and riddle of the world. I really think I think this is just part of the human experience, is the riddle part of it. I don't know as if we're ever going to figure it all out. One other thing I'd just like to say, Nick, and I keep saying one other thing, you got me going. It's my morning coffee here. The sun hasn't risen yet, but I'm jacked up on this coffee. There are some researchers who say that a UFO experience can open one up to a series of other kind of anomalous experiences, paranormal, psychic, you name it. I know that Jeff Kripal in Rice University has written on that subject, and there are many others. So some researchers see that pattern in their research. That seems to be potentially something that has happened to me, because after the UFO experience, I've had a number of other anomalous experiences in my life that have helped to shape where I am and where I've gone, and shaped my life today. And that's a longer kind of story. And I don't know maybe I would have had these experiences anyway if there wasn't a UFO. I can't say that the UFO was an instigating factor, was the cause of these things. But it is interesting to me, and I'm writing about it, that the UFO incident was kind of an inciting incident, and there are other things that have happened. And it's all, Nick, around a greater expanding consciousness. It opened my world dramatically to other possibilities. And slowly it's moved me away from a purely Western kind of materialistic point of view to a more idealistic, even dare I say, spiritual path. And that may have been exactly what I needed to have when all accounts are given. That may be exactly the thing that has made it possible. The other one other thing along these lines. And Matthew Salton, the filmmaker, has recently released a 11-minute animated documentary on his search for understanding UFOs and some of his early experiences and his parents' views on it and what he's learned, why he's fascinated with this subject. He had talked to me and has featured my story and the Brockport UFO story a great deal in this film. It was the short of the week on YouTube. It's available on YouTube. It's entitled Psychedelic in the Sky. As I recall, he took that from one of our conversations that he taped. And I said that UFO, as I look back at it, the Brockport UFO to me was like a psychedelic in the sky, in that it expanded. I don't know if whoever remembers Timothy Leary and all the chat about expanding our consciousness. Well, that's exactly what this UFO did to me. It expanded my consciousness and made me open to other things that have happened in my life. And it's made all the difference for me.
And yeah, absolutely. Matthew's bit of animation that he did. I mean, Matthew reached out to me and I in turn, to our listeners, I then got in contact with Len. And if anyone's interested in seeing this wonderful, it is a beautifully crafted piece of animation. I will put a link below in the description, or you can go and watch it on the website. I'll put all the links. Go and have a look. It is wonderful, actually. I really enjoyed that. So a big shout out to Matthew.
Yeah, he did a great job.
He did a great job. But hopefully, he's going to do some more along the same lines.
Well, I haven't talked to him about his plans on this, but he's from what this film by Matthew explores, it's kind of a view inside his own reflections and ruminations about this subject. So the things that he talks about in trying to understand this leads me to believe that there may be more to his investigation of the subject matter. Yes.
Yeah, so hopefully, we can maybe pull that out of him. We could probably do that. And a lot of time what you'll see someone which is releasing content on others before going back and then maybe visiting their own experiences. That is something I see quite a lot. So maybe that's what he's thinking of doing.
Could be. I'm really not sure, but he's certainly an artist. He did an excellent job on this film, and I urge people to go take a look at it. It's called Psychedelic in the Sky. It's available to the public on YouTube. Just out for a week and a half now. So go check it out.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, to be honest, Len, but I was just compelled. Literally, as soon as he gave me the link to it, I went and had a look. I must have watched it about 6 times.
Wow, it is interesting. After the Brockport UFO, I had, just in a matter of a few years, I had a poltergeist experience, a Kundalini awakening experience, and an experience with a sort of a famous Catholic priest who I had some kind of visitation with him on the night he died. That's the Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, and that's another of the stories that Diana writes about in Encounters. And I've had others as this goes on. So, I'm glad I'm retired now so that I can focus on this stuff and try to communicate it clearly, because there is more under the skies than our philosophy reveals.
Absolutely. But what about other things like synchronicities? Have you ever experienced that in your life?
Absolutely. Yes. May I tell you one there were two really but I would like to share them. Yes. Synchronicities have happened all the time. One of them was with a buddy of mine. The poltergeist I experienced was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We were living on what you might call a hippie commune, right? But we're all working construction and we're making a living, but we're long-haired hippies and we're exploring different kinds of lifestyles and philosophies and metaphysics and all kinds of stuff going on. Anyway, the owner of the construction company for whom we worked invited us to his house for a great big dinner, our Sunday brunch. And we ate and retired to his living room, where we began talking about things metaphysical. And at some point he said, "Oh, well, we have a ghost here in the house." And as I've written about it, I'm pretty sure it was me, but at least I was thinking to ask this question, but I asked, "Oh, does it have a name?" And he said something like, "Yeah, we call him George." As soon as he said the name George, there were two French doors that were leading to another room that opened into the living room. They blew open. They just flew open as though a tornado blew them open. And the curtains on them were flying straight out horizontally. And it was like this whoosh of a dramatic, perfectly timed activity. And I looked at that. I was utterly there was nothing there other than that. Although when I've tried to explain it, I've explained it like this. The feeling I had was, if you're in a private room and you're reading, and you might feel a presence, you look up and your wife is in the doorway looking at you. You kind of felt that human presence before you observed it. That's the feeling. That feeling of a human presence was whooshed through the room. That's what I experienced. I had just a little bit of enough clarity of mind to look at some of the other people, and they were like, just for seconds, frozen. They were still looking at Al, the guy who had mentioned the ghost. They weren't even looking at that. And I thought, oh, okay, well, what's going on here? We never talked about it. There were probably 10 of us in that, maybe 8 of us in that room. We never really talked about it, but that was common. Things happen and all of that. But then years later, as I began to take a look, investigate some of these things, I talked with Al. Al said, yes, there was a boy who drowned in a pool in that house across the street in Huddard Park in Tulsa. And his ex-wife and a daughter confirmed these reports, that there had been cookies chewed up and in the middle of the room, and cupboards crashing and glasses breaking and all kinds of poltergeist activity. And so I had that information, and unfortunately Al died. And I thought, yeah, but I talked to some of my buddies who were on the commune with me. We called it on the farm with me. I talked to them and they did not remember it. And a few of them have died, and a few of them have died after I've talked to them. They just didn't remember it. And I thought, oh my gosh, that just can't be. This is wild. How am I going to write about this if I don't have corroborating evidence? Sure, I've got interviews by the people who live there and whatnot, but I don't have another person who was there at the time who can corroborate it. The very afternoon that I said, well, I'm just going to have to, I've tried every track. There's no way to track anything down. These are all dead ends as far as my friends go. I give up on this. I'm just going to have to go with what I have. My phone rang, and a friend of mine, we call him Doc DeGroat, Albert Michael DeGroat, gave me a call, and he was filling me in on something. And I think we were talking about Al Frampton, or I mentioned I talked with Al Frampton, who was the owner of the place we rented and also the construction company where we worked. And he said, I remember Al. I remember Tulsa and the farm and the ghost. I go, what? Repeat that. He said, I remember the ghost. I had forgotten that Doc was there because he left the commune early. And I didn't even count him as one of the possibilities. He called me and mentioned the ghost the very day that I gave up on trying to track down my friends. And to me, And then we talked about it. I've interviewed him. I have him on tape. He saw the exact same thing. What he felt, though, was cold, very cold air coming through. Where I felt a human presence, I didn't feel cold. He felt icy cold air coming through. So that seemed very synchronistic to me, and as a sign from the universe to keep working on this project. So yeah, there have been synchronicities.
And it's something that you see, Len, whether it's anything to do with an early experience or that people's interest and connection with these subjects prime you to be maybe more connected with these things. I'm not sure, but there definitely is something there. Now, whether some people tend to pull back the curtain and peek more than others. You do see that. Some people have no interest and don't want to go near these subjects whatsoever. Other people, they're curious. They want to explore, and maybe that opens up people. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either, but I know that it exists because these were close friends of mine, and some of them did not see what we saw, what Doc and I saw, and it's inexplicable to me. Although I hear that from other reports of experiencers of both poltergeists and UFOs. Someone will see something right in the front of them, and someone else that they're with just does not see it, doesn't experience it, and I don't know why. But it's common in the literature.
It is, and I've even had UFO reports where it's been quite up close and personal, where one person has seen it and the person next to him, which in the case I'm referring to was a father, didn't see it, just didn't see anything.
That's why I'm content to live with the mystery. I'm not going to drive myself crazy. Look, I want to emphasize, I'm just a normal guy. You know, I have a wife, 2 kids, mortgage, I've worked all my life, toiled, I'm just a normal, I'm a Cleveland Browns fan. I have all the abuse I can take from my football team, and there's nothing unique or extraordinary about me. I'm just an ordinary guy. I don't know why this stuff happens. And I'm happy just to let the miracle be, or the miracles, or the mystery, let the mysteries be, and not worry about finding out the answer, because I think Alexander Pope says we are in endless error hurled. I don't believe we'll ever come up. Maybe after this mortal coil, we've slipped. I just don't know.
Maybe, but like you said, it's all I think it's all part of the human experience, Len.
Yes.
Whether or not we'll get all the answers, I don't know. Maybe not in our lifetime, but maybe we will. But if you look at I get a lot of emails, Len, and a lot of people which come on the show are just normal people. I've had all walks of life, all backgrounds, all educational backgrounds, various different levels, different jobs. I've had people from NASA. Admittedly, sometimes people won't mention their career if they're still working for obvious reasons.
Right.
Such diverse amount of people on the show, which are just normal people. When it comes to the town drunk, who's always into conspiracy theories and always saying he's been abducted by aliens. Right. I mean, that's just a thing for the movies, that people have these experiences in all walks of life.
Do you have an interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the unxnetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Clyde Lewis, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Christina Gomez. Visit the unxnetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time.
It's new.
It's the X.
Now, Len, you say you're a normal person, but, an interesting thing is that you did spend some time on Capitol Hill.
Well, I have a degree in journalism, and journalism jobs were tough to get in 1975. Woodward and Bernstein had basically toppled the Nixon regime, and there were huge swelling ranks of wannabe journalists all over, and the economy wasn't so great. I had worked in a television newsroom as an intern in Rochester, New York, WROC, and through some acquaintances, I found out that there's this office opening in Rochester, the statewide campaign office for this peanut farmer from Georgia who wanted to become president. So I went and talked to those people, and I was hired as the press secretary for New York State 1976 Jimmy Carter presidential campaign. And Jimmy started winning, and he kept winning, and I would go from primary to primary. I worked in New York, Connecticut, Oregon, New Jersey during the primary season, and then after we won the nomination, I was in Chicago for the general election and did press operations for the state of Illinois. After we won the presidency, I went to Washington, and I worked in the Interior Department for a while, and it has good work to do. I was kind of bored with it and worked on Capitol Hill for a congressman named Andrew Maguire, Democrat from New Jersey, very active in health and anti-cancer, all kinds of issues, very active legislative office, and worked as a press secretary for him for a few years. And then I left Washington to go work on a rock and roll horror movie called Fear No Evil, directed by Frank LaLoggia, and it's because I wanted to write screenplays. So that's what ultimately brought me out to California, where I've written a bunch of screenplays and done a lot of freelancing and worked a lot of corporate jobs out here. I worked at SRI International, which was interesting. Those of you who know SRI International probably know about the remote viewing program that Puthoff and Targ were running there. I came in well after them, but I'll tell you, even in the early 90s, long after they were gone, the remote viewing program echoed throughout the halls of SRI. I was able to talk to some of the old timers who, had been part of that, and we would, I'd pick their brains a little bit on what had happened and its legacy. And I can tell you, and I told this to Russell Targ. I ran into him at a conference once. He was going to give us all a lesson in remote viewing. And I told him that even in that late 90s, we had one person on our, 8-member communication staff for SRI. One person was full-time job devoted to answering worldwide questions about the remote viewing and all that activity that had gone on. So the interest remained keen and long-lasting, and that was an interesting time for me. But worked for a number of corporate situations here: Sun Microsystems, software publishing, and then ran a PR advertising agency in Silicon Valley. But finally was able to leave the high-tech rat race, Silicon Valley rat race, and devote myself to some writing. I had children later in my life, so I wrote a book about later life fatherhood, which I discovered was a joy rather than a horrible job. I wrote about it that I found out I was going to be a first-time father at the age of 49, and I didn't know whether to celebrate with champagne or hemlock. But what I found out was it was the best thing I ever did, because as an older guy, I was more mature. I already have my yayas out. I have more money. I have more job security. I have more patience. I'm closer to death, so I appreciate life more. It's just for me, it was the right time to have children, and I could really devote myself to fatherhood in a way that I never could have if I was running around the country doing all the stuff that I used to do for politics and business. So did that, and I've written some screenplays. And I used to talk to my wife about this all the time. We'd go for walks, and I'd talk about my next idea for fiction, for a script, and I wrote some good scripts. And then it finally just kept going. I would say, well, what about my UFO? What about my Kundalini? What about this poltergeist? What about this Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen thing? I mean, what? And then and it's all nonfiction. These are real experiences that happened to me. So then once I start to get back into the UFO world a little bit, I find out that this is sort of a common theme in this community, that yes, people can have multiple paranormal, if you will, supernatural experiences. And one more thing, I've got to tip my hat to Jeff Kripal at Rice University, because he is a huge advocate of, and it's something you said earlier, which is such a great point, Nick, that these are human experiences. They have been recorded for centuries, and we shouldn't just throw them aside because they don't fit the channels of our particular scientific viewpoints now. We should take them off the dustbin, put them back on the table, expand our viewpoint, and take a look and investigate them, because they have been going on. They have happened to me, and I hope that we can continue to investigate the serious nature of these experiences, because they're real, they're happening, they're human, and I applaud Jeffrey Kripal for what he's doing to keep that rolling.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, how many times have you seen it over the decades where great inventors in their earlier days were laughed at because of their beliefs and what they were, the visionaries, they were thinking and things they were coming up with, they were just laughed at. Ridiculed. And it's the same thing entirely. People are having these experiences. I'm a big advocate for people to, come out and share it, where possible. Certain situations is understandable, but in an environment like this where people are faceless, it's just their voice resonating across the airwaves and coming into people's living rooms, to be shared. That's the way.
Oh, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. Radio is the theater of the mind. It's just, it's excellent stuff.
I mean, podcasts now, you can just reach anywhere in the world. I'm literally going into people's headphones all over the world. Maybe even off world, who knows?
Right, exactly. And what I meant by radio is that this is your guest voices, talking, without a bunch of visuals, without anything else. And it's a similar effect of going right into the theater of the mind with people, similar to what radio used to do, or still does, but it's more localized.
Absolutely. I grew up with radio. I love it. I still like listening to radio now.
You liked Art Bell, didn't you?
I loved Art Bell. In fact, Art Bell, I still go to the archive quite a lot and still listen to the old shows. I loved Art Bell. I loved hearing when he would do his shows. He'd cover a lot of politics and things that were happening in the news. I love to hear all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I still listen to his show now.
Oh, he was the best, wasn't he? And the thing about Art was, if you were a guest, the guests on his show, he treated with respect, and he let them tell their story. He asked questions that would be probing, but he wasn't trying to do any gotcha stuff. He allowed the guests to tell their story and let the listeners make up their own mind.
Exactly. Yeah. And pretty much this podcast was born along the same lines. It's about treating people with respect. We certainly never get people on here to ridicule them. I always did say, sometimes the stories, and he'd have students out, stoner students that would ring up and just go on flights of fantasy and just to wind him up. But he would always say, at the end of the day, it is entertainment.
Right. I listen to Art Bell a lot.
Now, I'm not going to let you go before asking you. Now, you were on Capitol Hill, and it was the Jimmy Carter years. Now, of course, anyone that knows anything about UFOs would know that Jimmy himself had a UFO sighting, and he also reported it, and he was kind of vocal about UFOs and how when he did get into office, he would do his best to kind of open things up about it. Did you ever have an idea, or did you ever get a chance to talk to Jimmy Carter about your own experience?
No, I didn't. The short answer is no. I was farther down on the food chain. Like, I was a campaign press secretary. I would go from state to state. The candidate would fly in. His press secretary was Jody Powell, and he'd fly with him, and he had his staff. So I only had, fragments of time, minutes here and there with Jimmy, and we were never able to talk about the UFO situation at all. But he was an honest and open guy. And yes, he did. When he was governor of Georgia, I believe he was already governor or maybe campaigning. But anyway, he saw one and he reported it. Now, there's all kinds of different stories about whether he was denied access to the UFO files or that he was told them. I'm trying to think of who's the Grant, the Canadian podcaster.
Cameron.
Grant Cameron. I'm sorry. The senior moment, I forgot his last. I think he has a new book out about Jimmy, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but I think there's a new book about Jimmy, and maybe he'll deal with that. I think that he has some good information about that. I don't, unfortunately. People have asked me. I just don't. I was too far down in the food chain during those days. And but I admire his honesty and courage, because you know what? That was really a brave thing for a politician of that era to do, to stand up and say, yes, I saw one.
It was very brave indeed, especially in those years. I mean, I was a toddler in those, from 77 to 81. I remember more of the Reagan years, but during those times, it was very brave. I don't know if brave or stupid. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it was received fairly well. I think maybe he had a number of forces to battle with, in Washington. But I admire his courage for coming forward and just stating what he saw.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've been contacted by other people which are in the political environment, and hasn't always turned out well for them. So it can be a very hit and miss thing. But, if you do come out with something like that, then you've got to be brave. Quite the risk indeed, especially in those turbulent years.
Yeah, there was still a lot of stigma attached to it. There was still a lot of, laughing behind your back. It was just, generally assumed that you were nutty if you said anything like that. And I just think Jimmy didn't care what they thought. He told the truth as he saw it. He's inspirational in many ways. I'm optimistic about the whole UFO thing too. I have worked with people before on projects and have talked to people. I don't have any abduction experience in my background, and I know that some of these sightings and abductions, they must be terribly scary. I would not want to be abducted. It would scare the heck out of me. But I also want to say that I was filled with optimism and promise, and my UFO sighting was like an answer. It was like a torch of illumination that was gliding through the sky, beckoning me onward to better and finer things. I think there's a very optimistic, good side of all this too. So despite negative experiences that some people have, I don't think it's all negative. So I just wanted to say that too. Although I'm not trying to deny their experiences nor minimize them, because I would not want to be in many of their shoes. I found it very optimistic.
No, you're absolutely right. And the listeners out there will understand where you're coming from. The people which have these abduction experiences can be on quite the spectrum. Two different ends. And I think a lot of times when people have the very traumatic side of these experiences, a lot of it comes from just simply not understanding. There's so many factors. Basically, you're at a very vulnerable point and these things are happening to you and you don't understand what's going on. And a lot of times when people be in their own houses, that is their place, that is where their safety, where their castle, and when people have been taken from that, usually against their will initially, it can be very difficult to accept. And sometimes our minds would completely close to these things as if they're not happening.
Yeah, John Mack, in some of his work, he said that that he did talk to some people who were initially very frightened and terrified, but then sort of in subsequent abduction situations, sort of got to know the beings and warmed up to them and were able to make a more pleasant experience or more informational and learning experience out of it. Having not experienced it, I really don't know. I take people at their face value when they talk about these things. I believe them, but it's never happened to me, so I don't talk about it and I don't really speculate about it. I'm just reporting what I've read from John Mack and other materials.
Yeah, the best way to look at it is it's like looking at that picture, with the iceberg, which you can just see the tip of the iceberg on the top of the water, but then they show the rest of the iceberg, which is below the surface, and it's a lot like that. The subject is very complex when it comes to this. It's not as simple as just someone being visited by aliens. It's a very complex, and also on top of that, people are very complex.
Yeah, if I were to speculate, and I'm just speculating, I don't know, but speculating from what I've learned in my experiences and the things that have happened to me and the knowledge that I've gained, if any, is that I have a sense that we are all connected. We're all connected somehow, and on some stratum of energy and life and creativity. And I would think that includes other beings. I think we are connected with them. I'm connected with you, and it's all somehow connected. And I think that would include any space brothers who would be visiting.
I've always said that, a bit like a hive mind, where we're all connected through the universe. We pull out ideas from the ether.
Yeah.
That is wonderful, Len. You did just great.
I greatly appreciate your interest in this. I loved being on the show, and looking forward to November 9th and see what the end product is like. And I wish you continued success because you're doing a good job and it's needed, and I urge you to continue.
That's very kind of you, Len. Len, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all that fascinating experiences with us.
Well, thank you very much. I hope I really hope it helps people. I said a little prayer before I came on. Just let me let me help one person who might hear this stuff, because I think that's what it's about.
And it will do, Len. I guarantee it. Like I said before, every time I have a guest on, I'd have about 30 more people which get in contact. Every time. Len, wonderful to have you on. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk soon, sir.
Many thanks, sir. Very good. I appreciate it.
Goodbye for now.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that is all for this episode. Keep updated and connected with the show on X, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you have an encounter that you'd like to share on the podcast, you can email me at ufochronicles@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me via the contact page on my website, ufochroniclespodcast.com. A big thank you to Len for sharing tonight, and as always, thank you all for listening. I will be back next week. Till then, stay safe and keep watching the skies. Goodbye.